Are you familiar with replay attacks for the Security Plus exam? If not, well, good luck. We're going to have that conversation starting right now.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Welcome back to Security Plus here at IT Pro TV, and today we are talking about and discussing replay attacks. Say it with me again. Replay attacks. One more time. Replay attacks. That's right. Things you do repetitively over and over again. Wes, let's start off with just that very thing, because I mean, obviously there's some definition kind of embezzled in the words that we're using, right?
Yep.
The idea that we are replaying something and that is a form of attack. Break it down for us a little bit more, if you would please, sir.
Absolutely. So let's take a look at when it comes to a replay attack. What are we talking about? Well, we're talking about a retransmission of data. That's a replay attack.
Oh, well, there you go, everyone. Replay attacks are pretty simplistic things.
Well, we got a little bit more.
I'm assuming there's a little more meat on that bone.
That's right.
We'll break it down a little bit further for us.
I was going to say, you want me to repeat that?
Yeah, if you would.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and dive in a little bit more. When we talk about replay attacks, we're talking, Dan kind of set it up really well and really gives you the majority of that concept. The concept is, let's say we've got a user, right? A user is going to log in maybe to some kind of server, maybe a login server, right? Now, the login successful. Well, imagine this. Imagine after that login happens, right? Now the user can access the resource. That's normal, the normal procedure, right? Maybe I log into a Windows domain, right? Well, until I log into the Windows domain, the resources that are within that Windows domain, I don't have access to. I log in, now I can gain access to the resource. Now, let's pull our attacker in here. When we look at our attacker, same thing, no different in the process, no different in the process. We've got a user's going to log into a server. All right, now when the user logs in, here's where our bad actor, our threat actor comes in.
He looks familiar.
He does, absolutely. Well, apparently, I learned this from you. All bad actors have to have hoodies and sunglasses.
I think they're issued them when they say, you know what, I'm going to be a hacker.
Oh, it's a part of the toolkit. Very
you
good. So now what happens when the login goes across the network, notice what's going to happen. Our attacker is out here on the network doing a little packet sniffing. And yes, the login's going to be successful, but now we've got somebody in the middle, right? We'll talk a little bit more about the man in the middle and the man in the browser coming up. We'll have an episode on that. But now that attacker captures that information, right? And yes, no different, right? The user is accessing the resource just like we think they should. However, after the accessing of the resource, the user or the captured login is then replayed against the login server at a later time. Not the login server, excuse me. The resource server retransmits that resource request, and now they potentially have access to the resources, bypassing the login altogether. So this is kind of what an example of a replay attack. Capturing that information, being in between the communications, right? Storing that information, if you will, and then passing that information off back to the resource server. And guess what? The user or the attacker didn't even have to log in.
Is your example here based off of something like a Kerberos authentication?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because that totally makes sense. Once I've got the authenticated information that I need, I no longer need to bother with the login server anymore. The resources just go, oh, you got the right thing.
That's absolutely correct. You get your TGT, your ticket granting ticket, right? And the server sends you that back, and then you hand that ticket granting ticket back to the resource server. Well, we just went ahead and we scraped some of that, and now we'll just pass that off to the resource server.
The good stuff.
That's right.
We just need the good stuff.
And then we essentially get access. So that really is what a replay attack essentially is. Now, keep in mind the complexities behind it. There are various types of replay attacks, but this essentially is the gist of a replay attack.
Yeah, and that's obviously a bit more of a complex, but probably a very realistic look at what you would see as far as a replay attack. Let's break it down a little even farther, make it a little more simplistic. Let's talk about like a sniffing type. How do we get that information?
All right, well, so something like Wireshark, right? So a packet or protocol analyzer, if we're out there on the network and we set it into what's known as promiscuous mode, where, see, network adapters, they really need to communicate between, or only communicate with packets that are addressed to them, right? If I send a packet of information to Dan, right, his network adapter is going to recognize that address, and it's going to answer the information. All the other computers on the network, since it's not addressed to them, they're not even going to bother with it. It's probably not even going to go to them. But an attacker puts their network adapter into promiscuous mode, and what that says is, I don't care about the addressing information. I want to see everything that's going across your network to everybody. And that's one of the reasons things like broadcast communications and IPv4 can be something that can really, when it comes down to it, can be exploited, if you will. Because if everybody's receiving the communication, and part of that everybody is the attacker on your network, and they've got this protocol analyzer, packet sniffer, if you will, they can capture that information, store it in what's known as like a PCAP file, turn around and use that information later and end up using it to attack your systems.
All right. Well, now we know how they're getting that information. Wes, why don't you give us a little bit of insights on how that information is then passed from the attacker out to the resources that it's trying to get to?
Yeah, Dan, let's give you an example of a specific type of replay attack where it called pass the hash. Now, I want you to think about this, right? Our user is going to perform some kind of login to a login server, right? It's important to understand that we typically don't send any kind of clear text password across the network, right? Usually what your login server is doing is really checking the local hash that they've got stored on their database. Well, if the attacker can actually get that hashed password, all right, then what they can do is they can replay it later, right? Collect that hash value, and then later at another time, they can take that hash value and replay that, if you will, against the login server, retransmitting that hash. And remember, since the login server isn't storing the username, isn't storing the actual words or the characters, just that hash, it's going to look and say, okay, somebody just passed me this hash value. I'm going to look at my database and, hey, oh, look, it matches. They think it's the authorized user. The authentication system is none the wiser. And now they end up getting access to whatever it is, privileges, authorization that the authorized user has access to. So that's kind of an example of a specific form of replay attack.
Yeah, plus pass the hash is really fun because you're like, I've got these hashes. I could try to crack them, or I'll just give them to the server and it'll say, hey, that looks right. Come on in, do whatever you need. Here's a resource, enjoy. And I'm like, thank you very, very much. I will do that. All right, now that we understand how we get some hashes and what we can do with them with something like a pass the hash, can you give us maybe a little sneak peek, maybe a demo of how this thing can work?
Well, one of the things I'd like to show you is that in certain network communications, we have what are known as, I'll tell you some methods that we can protect, right, against this, like timestamps. All right, when we talk about timestamping and sequencing information, when you have communication protocols that are using this, say something like TCP, all right, that sequencing makes sure that the information is rebuilt in the right order, but the timestamps also say that it's current and it's part of the current session. So for instance, we have things like IPsec communications that do and perform this timestamping, if you will. And what happens is if I capture that information, it's going to have a timestamp in it, right? And let alone the sequencing. And if I turn around and replay that later, the server's going to go, wait, this isn't part of the current session. In fact, I don't even know what this is, and it discards it. Let me show you down here in Wireshark where you can see some of that information. Let me go ahead and just fire up Wireshark or something close to that. And what we'll do here is I'll just do a little capture of some traffic on my local network here. And what we should see is, well, I see some DNS information. Chances are, I bet you my Windows 10 machine is trying to contact Windows updates. I don't know why I would think that.
You mean its favorite thing to do.
That's right. I don't know if we have any TCP information going on right now, but let's see if we do. Maybe I'll try to generate by firing up our web browser. I don't think it's going to connect because, again, I'm not connected, certainly not connected to the internet on this one. So now that I've fired that up, hopefully that's generated a little bit of traffic, and maybe it'll give my computer back.
There's a few
All right, there we go.
packets.
And it's interesting. We also see some LDAP communication too that we've talked about in other episodes. So let me just grab any one of these packets here and just kind of show you what I mean about timestamping. If we dig into, and again, I'm just using Wireshark doing a packet capture, right? This is how the attacker essentially would capture that information, by the way. If we're going in between a login server and that attacker is on that network, they can use these protocol analyzers to see that information, capture it, and potentially use it later against whatever their target is. But you'll see inside of TCP IP, and I'll zoom in on this. I know it's a little bit hard to see. Notice that there's a sequencing number right here, and you'll see that number. That sequencing number lets us know that this is a current active session. All right, and we need to know that transmission control protocol, what it does to ensure reliable delivery is it breaks down all of the packets sequences them, numbers them, if you will, and then sends them to the other side to be rebuilt. And I believe what we will see in here is, yeah, there we go, some timestamps. All right. So it tells you time since first frame and since previous frame. So, all right, we're seeing the difference in the timing here, right? That's how it's supposed to work, and that's one of the things that can help not just transmission control protocol, but things like, for instance, IPsec, which puts its own timestamps on the information that if I capture that information later and the receiving or the recipient of that information, let's say the server, looks at it and says, well, wait a second, Wes, I'm looking at the timestamp in this information, and that timestamp was for, well, not right now. It was for earlier, and what it's going to do is it's essentially just going to discard the packets. So that packet, if you will. And that's kind of the way these protocols will help you, specifically like IPsec, to prevent things like replay attacks.
And I noticed that these are in fractions of a second.
Yes.
So if you see even a few seconds difference between these
hundreds,
things,
millions of a second.
Right. It's probably an indication that something weird is going on behind the scenes, I would assume.
Sure, and you can see when packets aren't accepted too, right? So notice that it's telling me, wait a second, now I received something out of order. I'm gonna request a retransmission of that packet because whatever happened, whether it's the sequence number or it was a little bit off in time, yeah, let's just discard that. We're not gonna accept that. But an attacker, if they can manipulate this kind of communication, then that's where they can potentially get in. They could capture that information and replay it later.
All right. Well, there you go. The replay attacks are definitely something we need to be aware of for the Security Plus exam, but they also seem to be quite handy for us to be aware of when it comes to defending a network against these types of attacks. So it's a good thing that Wes, you took us down the old replay attack road for this here exam. That being said, this is all we have for this episode. Plenty more to come in the Security Plus series, so we look forward to seeing you there. Until then, have a great day.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.